"Welcome to the land of peace." That is what the billboards proclaimed as President Donald Trump arrived in the Egyptian resort of Sharm el-Sheikh on October 13, 2025. In a ceremony attended by 30 world leaders, the US president hailed what he called the historic dawn of a new Middle East. A US-brokered ceasefire meant to end the devastating two-year war in Gaza and bring peace to the region. But while dignitaries were celebrating in the Egyptian sun, just a few hundred kilometers to the north, amid the ruins of Gaza, there were few signs of any historic dawn. Despite 2 years of fighting, Israel failed to eliminate Hamas, which still effectively controls large parts of the enclave. Around 68,000 Palestinians have been killed, and 85% of Gaza's infrastructure lies in ruins. The cost of reconstruction is estimated at $70 billion. Even with the ceasefire in place, lasting peace remains an illusion. Israeli forces still occupy more than half of Gaza, and Prime Minister Netanyahu's far-right coalition partners openly call for renewed fighting. Meanwhile, Israel has dramatically escalated operations on another front, the West Bank. In August, the government approved construction of the highly controversial E1 settlement, which Minister Bezalel Smotrich described as, quote, "the burial of the two-state solution." Then, on October 23rd, while US Vice President J.D. Vance was visiting Israel, the Knesset passed the first reading of a bill to annex the West Bank. Yet one fundamental question remains. Is Trump's initiative truly the beginning of a new era, or just a diplomatic show designed to feed his ego? Does he have the will and the skill to keep both his difficult ally Israel and Hamas under control and turn a fragile truce into a real peace? Let's find out. I don't know why you're always so fucking negative. This is a win. Take it. According to Axios, that is what Donald Trump reportedly told Benjamin Netanyahu when the Israeli Prime Minister tried to sabotage the ceasefire with Hamas. The quote perfectly captures Trump's determination. For him, the war in Gaza was an unnecessary burden, one that threatened to derail his grand vision, expanding the Abraham Accords to include Saudi Arabia, the ultimate legacy of his presidency. Trump's 20-point peace plan for Gaza is divided into 3 stages. In the first stage, both sides agreed to halt fighting. Israel withdrew its forces to the so-called Yellow Line and allowed greater humanitarian access to the enclave. Nearly 2,000 Palestinian prisoners were released from Israeli jails, while Hamas freed 20 surviving hostages and agreed to return the bodies of 28 hostages who had died in captivity to Israel. Yet the real trouble begins in the following stages of Trump's plan, which outline what many see as an unrealistic scenario: the complete disarmament of Hamas, the demilitarization of Gaza, and the creation of a temporary technocratic government, excluding both Hamas and the Palestinian Authority. Oversight of this new administration would fall to an international, quote, board of peace, chaired by Trump himself, with figures such as former British Prime Minister Tony Blair expected to take part. At some undefined point in the future, control of Gaza would be transferred to the Palestinian Authority, but only after a sweeping series of internal reforms. Security in the enclave would be handled by International Stabilization Forces, a coalition potentially including troops from Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, Qatar, and the UAE. Under the plan, these forces would gradually assume control of Gaza as the IDF withdrew. The 19th point of Trump's peace plan calls for the creation of an independent Palestinian state, but it offers no timeline or indication of which territories that state would encompass. In practice, many of the plan's provisions are likely to remain on paper. Neither side appears willing to accept the terms imposed by Washington. The first points of Trump's peace plan have already proven to be an illusion. Demilitarizing Gaza is a fantasy. The moment the ceasefire was signed and Israeli troops began pulling back to the so-called Yellow Line, Hamas moved to crush the local clans that had cooperated with Israel in recent months. A wave of skirmishes and public executions followed. Not only a brutal show of strength, proving that after 2 years of war, Hamas still commands organized armed forces, but also a clear message to Israel and the United States. Hamas remains the only real authority in Gaza, and any attempt to exclude it from post-war arrangements is pointless. Hamas has flatly rejected calls for disarmament and refuses to dismantle its military infrastructure, from the vast tunnel network running beneath Gaza to its improvised weapons workshops. The group's stance was summed up by Mohammed Nazal, a member of Hamas' political bureau, who declared that the best path forward would be to extend the truce for 3 to 5 years, without any commitment to disarm or relinquish control of the enclave. Prime Minister Netanyahu's government, in Hamas's defiance, sees an opportunity, hoping that Trump will eventually lose patience with the militants and give Israel a free hand in Gaza. In the best-case scenario for Israel, that would mean resuming military operations. In the worst, it would mean formal approval for the continued presence of IDF troops along the Yellow Line, effectively turning it into a new border. In that case, 53% of the Gaza Strip would remain under Israeli control. In such an atmosphere, the creation of international stabilization forces meant to oversee security in Gaza is becoming increasingly unlikely. Arab states refused to send troops, fearing they would be branded as occupiers collaborating with Israel against Hamas. The mission's prospects are further undermined by Netanyahu's insistence on controlling its composition, including his veto of Turkey's participation. This is no accident. It is a calculated move. If the international force never materializes, the IDF can remain in Gaza indefinitely, under the pretext of maintaining order. Facing a deadlock, the US administration has begun floating a de facto partition of Gaza. Jared Kushner is reportedly pushing a controversial proposal under which only the Israeli-controlled parts of the enclave would be rebuilt, while areas under Hamas control would be cut off from reconstruction funds. Kushner argues that this would pressure Hamas into concessions. In reality, however, it looks more like a step toward permanent Israeli control and de facto annexation of parts of Gaza, mirroring the divisions already entrenched in the occupied West Bank. For Benjamin Netanyahu, the ceasefire is both a blessing and a curse. The release of hostages briefly boosted his popularity. October polls even showed his coalition nearing a stable majority of 65 seats in the Knesset. But that political capital is fragile. The end of the war inevitably means the start of accountability, something Netanyahu's government is desperate to avoid. On October 22nd, the ruling coalition blocked an opposition motion to create a state commission of inquiry into the failures of October 7, 2023. Meanwhile, old crises are resurfacing, including the long-running dispute over ultra-Orthodox military conscription, which nearly collapsed the coalition in mid-2025. And so, Benjamin Netanyahu finds himself trapped between Washington and his own hardliners. His far-right allies, Bezalel Smotrich of religious Zionism and Itamar Ben-Gvir of Jewish power, reject Trump's peace plan, calling it an act of surrender. For them, the only acceptable outcome is the total destruction of Hamas. While they haven't yet quit the government, it is clear they will eventually push for a renewed offensive in Gaza. If not a full-scale war, then at least a limited operation, such as reoccupying the Netzarim corridor. Netanyahu knows that breaking the ceasefire would trigger a major clash with Trump, yet he must keep his coalition intact. To placate the hawks, the government is preparing a legislative blitz for the upcoming winter Knesset session, the last before the 2026 elections. The plan includes a return to the controversial judicial overhaul and, most importantly, initial steps toward annexing parts of the West Bank, presented as a reward for his far-right partners after the Gaza truce. At the same time, Netanyahu is reportedly considering lowering the electoral threshold, a tactical move to keep Smotrich's party, which hovers near the cutoff point, from falling out of parliament. Therefore, in the coming months, the West Bank could become the most volatile front. Under pressure from Bezalel Smotrich, who oversees civil administration in the occupied territories, the Netanyahu government has dramatically accelerated the expansion of illegal Jewish settlements. The numbers are alarming. Since October 2023, Israeli settlers have established 114 new illegal outposts. Around 13,000 acres, or 5,500 hectares, of Palestinian land have been confiscated, and the UN has recorded over 3,000 incidents of settler violence since the start of the war. Even while fighting in Gaza was still raging, and as European states threatened to recognize a Palestinian state, Israel responded by warning that it would annex the West Bank. At the time, those threats never materialized. Yet. Now, however, the issue has returned with force. On October 23rd, the Knesset passed the first reading of a bill to annex the West Bank. Although Netanyahu officially distanced himself from the proposal, calling it, quote, opposition trolling, and insisting it would die in committee, the very fact that the vote took place reveals the Israeli far-right's determination and his growing disregard for Washington's position. Trump has repeatedly stated he would not allow annexation of the West Bank, yet the Knesset scheduled the vote on the very same day US Vice President J.D. Vance was visiting Israel, a direct act of political defiance. Washington's opposition stems from the understanding that annexation would torpedo the prospect of a Saudi-Israeli peace deal. But looked at more closely, the US response appears largely performative, meant for show. Unless, of course, the administration truly failed to grasp what it had already implicitly agreed to. Because at the center of Israel's quiet annexation stands the E1 project, an illegal settlement planned to form a land corridor between Jerusalem and Ma'ale Adumim. On September 11, 2025, Netanyahu approved the construction of 3,400 housing units, while Minister Bezalel Smotrich triumphantly declared it, quote, the end of the two-state idea. The project is a geopolitical turning point. Once built, it would create continuous Israeli territory from central Israel to the Jordan Valley, cutting the West Bank in two and severing Ramallah's link to Bethlehem, effectively ending hopes for a viable Palestinian state. The plan dates back to the 1990s, repeatedly blocked by Washington, until now. Current US Ambassador Mike Huckabee has said the US, quote, does not oppose the project and that decisions about E1, quote, belong to Israel. Even if the West Bank annexation bill fails, as it probably will in the Knesset, E1 remains a de facto annexation, irreversibly changing the region's political and geographic reality. The scale of recent US diplomatic involvement is unprecedented. Washington is doing everything possible to keep the ceasefire alive. Israel has become the destination for a relay of top US officials. Following Trump's visit, Jerusalem hosted Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, Vice President J.D. Vance, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The US administration doesn't trust Netanyahu, fearing he might break the deal under pressure from his coalition partners. To prevent that, Washington has taken control. The US sent 200 troops to Israel and opened a civil-military coordination center in Kiryat Gat to oversee the implementation of the ceasefire. Israeli media call it babysitting. America keeping Netanyahu in check to stop him from sabotaging Trump's grand project, normalizing relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel. According to US reports, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is expected at the White House on November 18th, where normalization will undoubtedly top the agenda. The Gaza ceasefire is, without question, a PR victory for Donald Trump. The US president wanted a diplomatic spectacle, and he got one, celebrating a quote new dawn under the spotlight in Sharm el-Sheikh. But the road to a lasting political settlement remains long and treacherous, and the chances of fully implementing his plan are slim. The core terms of the deal are unacceptable to both sides. Hamas has no intention of disarming or relinquishing power, and is instead consolidating control over Gaza. Israel's ruling coalition, on the other hand, driven by militarism and expansionism, will resist any full withdrawal and continue its policy of creeping annexation on the West Bank. If Trump truly wants results, not just applause, he will need to tighten the screws on the both sides. He has the leverage to do so. For instance, he could pressure Israel to release Marwan Barghouti, the charismatic Fatah leader, imprisoned by Israel since 2002. Barghouti remains the most popular Palestinian politician, and polls consistently show he would win the long-delayed presidential elections in the Palestinian Authority. His release could provide a credible partner for talks, and a glimmer of hope for a durable peace. The question is whether Trump is willing to take such a bold step. His past dealings with Netanyahu suggest a familiar pattern. The US president voices frustration, tries to impose his agenda, and ultimately backs down, whether over strikes on Iran, the Qatar bombing, or the occupation of southern Syria. So will this time be any different? Will the quote historic dawn of a new Middle East amount to more than a one-man show before the curtain falls and chaos returns to the stage?